You know? Right. What, did you have some like ridiculous tattoo artist who's never heard of an FFT?
These things showed you?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Join. Okay. So each of them says, I think they should be in the document.
That's fine. We can like just.
Okay, so we'll just do that for. Oh, did you actually open all three, or?
I opened issues for the Martin's draft.
Got it.
Your draft.
Yeah.
The tutorial.
Okay. Cool.
And then
Oh, I just put those up. Oh, I see. You want to get the other two.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or the other one. Okay. Cool. Make sure we can see the slides. Make sure that they actually came in. Okay, cool. Yeah, have to trust that.
all right.
Okay,
Excellent.
we're good. Wait, how did you just get that last bit?
For a second.
Oh, okay. Okay. We got time. Do you need to go pee or something?
No, I just Martin should obviously be here.
Martin should obviously be here. Melissa should obviously be
She's
here.
here. She said.
Oh, she is. Okay, because she is. Oh, they're live streaming this on YouTube.
Oh, all
And
right.
my question was, why? It was, well, because I was told to. So I think it was because they were live streaming the last one, and they just decided, since we're in the room, to live stream. So yeah, that was my attitude. It said no one was watching the last one, and that was about IoT.
Oh,
Like, yeah, so
yeah, okay.
people watched it. So. Oh, yeah, Mark, that's good.
We should have a very short agenda, so I'm gonna.
We're starting soon. I think we have
No, we started at 3:20, right?
I thought this was a longer one.
No.
No, you're right.
Yeah. So we have one more minute for someone to trickle in. Some people. All right, let me get started. Hello, everyone. This is the Git working group. Thanks for coming. Like I said, hopefully this is pretty short, but you never know how these things go. This is the Notewell. You've probably seen this several times before, so if you're not familiar with it, please take a look and try to abide by it, or don't try. Do. Some administrative things. So the blue sheets are going around. Please fill them out if possible. Or yeah, do we have a JavaScribe? Anyone willing to volunteer? Thank you, Rich. Minute taker. Be better if someone was doing it. Anyone? Minute taker should be really easy. Open up text editor. Sorry?
No. You're the one talking the most, so. Don't bother. There's no one in this room. So.
Minute taker, anyone? I hear Sean. Sean Turner. Will you be willing to take notes? All right, thank you. This is the agenda. If you have any comments on it, like to change things, please let us know. But otherwise,
This is heavy. So basically, since it's not clear, everyone normally does agendas by putting draft file names. The first two things here are the two drafts in the working group. We will discuss them reasonably briefly. The third thing is actually not a working group item. It's a tutorial that people have been putting together to help other working groups sort of with what we've done. But the first two will actually probably go reasonably quickly. and that'll leave plenty of time to talk about the tutorial if people have been reading it.
All right. Yeah. So with that, we're going to start. There are no slides for the first presentation, which is the GitHub configuration document from Paul and Alyssa. We do have, however, 3 issues that it would be great if we could just march through them and do something with them, ideally close them or do something else. So to that end, I'm going to click on the first one. Yeah, this was brought up by, I forget exactly who on the list. Well, of course I filed it. The title is pretty self-explanatory. I wonder if people have a particular thought about this. Paul seems to think that this should possibly be something that's in the other draft.
Martin Thompson, I'm happy to put this in that other draft or accept a pull request that would do the same.
Excellent.
I think this is perfectly appropriate. There's a section there on using continuous integration in order to produce draft things, adding that not only do you produce the draft, but you produce a diff with various things would be perfectly reasonable.
Great.
Yeah.
So I will make, I'm not going to do it here because we're not signed in, but yes, I will file the issue on the other document. And then we can just, maybe I'll just submit a pull request.
It's a one sentence
Exactly.
change.
Yes.
So I think we can do that.
All right, great. It is resolved. This is one, Martin, you filed, but I actually from Mark. Do you want to speak to it?
So this is Mark's one. We moved Mark's issue. I can probably speak to it briefly. A lot of documents have a brief note at the start of them that explains what it is that the document is doing, where to discuss it, where to find the repository, where to file issues, that sort of thing. Conveniently, I recently added this capability to the template, so it will be automatically added by anyone who's using a modern setup. So, yay, another one that's solved, but we can probably make some notes about that as well.
In your document or the other one?
It's like the last one. I really don't care.
Yeah, okay.
Jeffrey Eskin. This is incredibly useful. The W3C also does it, and you can look in like Bike Shed for examples of how to do the metadata and stuff.
Yeah, great. I don't think anyone's questioning the validity. It's just where does this actual text go, more or less?
Mark Nottingham. I really don't want to like get in the way of your I'm shutting down this working group party, but what's the delineation between these documents again? Because it seems like it's really fuzzy a lot of the time.
It is, but I'm going to let the document author.
So the document that we're discussing is what is the tooling that the IETF should be doing to help working groups use GitHub. And the other document is how to use GitHub, especially if you're not using tooling, such as you may want to add this, you may want to do this. And that's why I had suggested this actually goes in the other in Martin's document.
My feedback would be that that's a really artificial and confusing delineation. And that in a better world, we would combine those documents, but you know, you're trying to close down a working group. So
The documents did at one point overlap to a much larger degree. So I think we've managed to separate them to some extent along this sort of gray fuzzy line.
I think it's
Perhaps it could be a bit more clear, but yeah.
I think it's a little more crisp than that. I see the one that I'm editing to be far more about advice on how you enact processes within working groups to deal with this. That is abstract of the specifics of how that's done. So I would say it is useful to put a note in the draft pointing to where the repository is, but I wouldn't specify the mechanics of that. Whereas the other draft is very specifically, hey, tools team, we want a link in the data tracker that points to these repositories or similar. So I think it's fairly crisp when you get right down to it, but I do agree with Mark that maybe it would have been better in retrospect had we not had this delineation, but I don't see much point in trying to fix it at this stage.
Mark, are you bringing something up where we don't have complete consensus?
What?
Nothing. Sorry. Full consensus.
If you're going to make the joke, get it right. I think I read the documents relatively recently. Perhaps you can improve this by just making it absolutely crystal clear in the abstract and the introduction who the audience for the document is, and ideally in the title of the document who the audience of the document is.
Good point.
Because I didn't get that sense from reading them.
Yeah, great suggestion. We can certainly do that. All right, next issue. Nope. Nope. All right, another one for Martin.
Yeah, so this one really belongs in this one right here. This definitely belongs in this document. Oh, Rich, thank you. You can tell us what's happening.
Yeah, hi, Rich Sauls. Yeah, I just added the comment, let's say 6 minutes ago. We're doing some work in the data tracker to normalize all of the links. So like the additional URLs field will have normalized names for most of those things. So you can like sort of add it programmatically. So for example, if you use the scripts that I'm also developing, then it'll automatically put the links in the data tracker to the repo. You can add your GitHub user ID in your name account so that someone can look it up and say, oh, this is so-and-so. So in progress.
Great.
Yep.
So
That one we will put in ours. We'll actually put a pointer.
exactly, yes. All right. So thank you. All right.
Paul, do you still have that question, or if
No,
okay.
now we'll put it in ours.
All right, Martin, you are up.
Yep.
Sure.
So one of the kind of long-standing issues that we had with the sort of more abstract document was how this fits into the existing standards processes and BCP 9 and is it 25? I've got 2 slides on this. Yeah, 25. There you go. I always forget that one. How much this sort of has to consider how it fits into that broader picture. This is just my proposal for these ones. If anyone wants to disagree with me, I'd be happy to discuss that. But I don't think that this document relates to BCP 9. I went through it in a little bit of detail, and it talks primarily about the process by which the IETF decides to turn internet drafts into standards, not the process by which the internet drafts get hammered out in the working group. And so my suggestion is that we don't deal with BCP 9 at all in this particular document. Does anyone have a different understanding of the purpose of that document and would suggest that we do otherwise? Okay, I see some thumbs up. The next one, we already cite BCP 25, which is the working group process document. And though BCP 25 is extraordinarily high level relative to the sort of thing that this document that we're talking about is, there are some aspects of this that we already address, very narrowly targeted. So most of the uses that we're talking about here relate to the document production process. I note that there are some other aspects of BCP 25 that people will use GitHub to assist in, that being primarily things like session planning, management of agendas and presentation materials, for instance. And I know that a lot of working group charters end up on GitHub and get beaten out on that one. My proposal, which I wasn't going to merge, but then Paul did it for me, violating one of the golden rules in this document. We'll talk about that later.
I have a co-author and I'm working group chair, so I thought it was okay.
Yeah. I had hoped to discuss it here before I merged that, was that only documents would be in scope. And in that pull request, I explicitly said that this is only documents, though these other things can be used. And I thought that Paul's tacit acceptance of that indicates that I was not entirely crazy, but I'd like to make sure that people in this room also think that I'm not entirely crazy.
So that'll appear, of course, in the next draft, which will be for working group last call. So I figured putting that in, since there had been no traffic on the list about it, was a reasonable thing.
Right.
But Sean
Hey,
says-
this is Sean Turner. Just to observe that if you told me I couldn't do it, I would probably ignore that advice, and I would keep right on doing the other things.
I would
Because
not
it's,
do that.
it's super helpful
Yeah.
to be able to do it for meeting requests, figuring out when people are going to show up, all of those other things.
Yeah, so I think the primary focus on documents here is important because those are the ones where you need the process.
Yes, completely
But
agree.
having that advice and applying that advice to the development of a charter or a revision to the charter isn't crazy. People are going to do that. And it turns out that most of this advice is still applicable in that context, but I didn't really want to get too bound up in dealing with that problem. In fact, that the proposed text did say that, and I was going to maybe put that up on screen, but we can deal with that in working group last call. Okay, next. Oh, and the last one. I don't know who opened this issue, but there was a point raised about the fact that GitHub does occasionally tend to attract spam and misbehavior of various forms. There are moderation tools, but they're not centralized in any way that would be available to us. So, for instance, we couldn't, if we wanted the equivalent of a posting rights action, block someone across all of the different organizations that the IETF would use. So there's some limitations there. So I have a couple of questions here, and these are a little difficult for me to deal with here because I don't know whether this expands the scope of the document or not. So I'd like a bit of discussion about this. Things like, do we need to have rules around things like dealing with someone who's misbehaving on GitHub? We can block them from repositories. Can we do that unilaterally or on the basis that, well, maybe they can just go to the mailing list and take their complaints there? Or do we have to have these repositories and all the things associated with them operate under rules that are similar to the mailing lists themselves? And to what extent do we need to support whatever actions that we take in that with tooling and whatnot? Yeah.
Forget it.
Don't touch
Alyssa Cooper. So PR action is not like a very common process. Like we don't use it very much. And so I'm curious if you're aware of other communities or someplace where the kind of case that would raise a PR action in the IETF has actually happened, like
I am aware
across
of-
lots of orgs and repos, not just in one.
So I am aware of at least one instance of this sort of behavior in the W3C. I was involved in one of those peripherally and certainly had to deal with that individual, and they were blocked from the organization at a number of different points, and it was just done on an ad hoc basis. And I would probably advocate for the ad hoc process until such time as we identify something that turns out to be a systemic issue that we need to deal with differently. But GitHub does have pretty good support with respect to abuse. And so I found that if you do observe someone doing bad things, you can just block them and it just works. And I would not advocate for doing that unless it really was bad, but it's possible.
Okay, that sounds good to me.
Yeah. The question then would be whether we put anything in the document about that. And I'm in two minds about that, really.
Hi, Sean Turner again. So I would like to note that in my 3 years, I guess, of using GitHub or something like that, somebody call me out on how long, that I find that there's a whole lot less times where I felt like there was any kind of bad behavior that raised to any kind of the level of the bad behavior that I've seen on recent mailing lists in the IETF. So maybe we just let this go because it's just not there, and we're trying to solve a problem that doesn't really exist. And if somebody does show up and is a super tool then we can quickly figure out, well, what it is that we need to do with them. So
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that answer. Anyone else?
This is Barry Leva. I'm comfortable with that answer. Also, I think what makes sense is to, yes, treat GitHub as a mailing list, not for the purposes of a PR action, for the purposes of abuse mitigation in general. And just whatever you can do with a mailing list, you're allowed to do with GitHub, and just leave it at that. And we need to say nothing more.
Yeah, Rich Stalls, I agree. I used to run the OpenSSL repo on Git, and it got more than its share of harassers. And, it's not a big deal. You just close their PRs and move on.
And let's remember, we also have the working group chair's mailing list. So if this comes up later, it's not like we need to rev the RFC that's coming out of this. The working group chairs talk among themselves, and someone would say, how do I do this? And things like that.
So I think the conclusion here would be that we don't put anything in this draft on this topic, and we deal with it using the existing support infrastructure that we have. I think that's a pretty sensible outcome.
It's based heavily on people. So,
which is based heavily on people, and this is a people problem.
Yep.
And like Sean said, this is not a problem that's really been a major problem in the past. It was worse in the case that I identified at the W3C, and it required a little more process than I think just closing their PRs would suggest. And I'm sure that Rich has had similar experiences himself, but I think we can manage that. Yep. That's all I had.
So yeah, we deal with the issues accordingly, and looks like that document is mostly ready to go. Everyone, please take a look at it and read it. Hopefully we can move it forward. Hang on. I guess we'll do the tutorial last. Yeah, fine. So yeah, so basically,
I do have one question.
sure.
Do you as chairs want a rev before we go to working group last call?
Yeah, that
I
seems
will get
easy.
you a rev very shortly.
Thank you. All right. So yeah, we're basically at a point now where both documents are fairly stable and mature, ready to move forward. At least the chairs think so. So we'd like to start working group last call for both of them right after this meeting ends, and we get Martin's updated version. Are there any objections to that? Great. I guess that now we go back over to the tutorial. So another thing that we've been working on sort of on the side, this is not, a working group deliverable by any means. It's just something that we kind of put together to help people not familiar with GitHub or Git in general, and who might want to start using it to better contribute to working groups. So it, as the title suggests, a workflow or a tutorial for kind of getting used to these new technologies, what the terms mean, what the typical workflows are like. The link, I should provide a link, but you can find it on the GitHub repo org page for this working group. I can send around a link to the mailing list as well for people to read. Be useful if the folks in this room who are interested in sort of helping improve this content, go through it, provide feedback. As the document suggests, that you can provide feedback on the GitHub repository that hosts this particular tutorial. It went around on some other threads earlier this week, so I believe other people in the IETF are looking at it. Not gotten any kind of signal as to whether or not it's been useful, but hopefully it's caused, or hopefully hasn't caused too much damage and hasn't confused anyone. So again, if there's any way we can improve this particular content, please do let us know on the mailing list, or ideally on the GitHub repo, and we can tweak it accordingly. I think there's already some issues on there to help clarify some things. Yeah, great. So with that, the last question for the group, tutorial, like I was saying, is not technically a deliverable for the working group, but there are various tools and things that have come out of the development of these documents, including updates to Martin's template tool. Is there anything else really that the working group should spend some time on thinking and working on together as a group? If so, perhaps I don't know, let us know at the mic or on the mailing list. there are suggestions for things and tools that might be useful in one of the wiki pages. I should have brought the link up. Actually, I can do that right now while I'm speaking to it. And if folks feel so inclined in doing some of these things or commenting on them, that would be lovely. But again, none of it is required. It's mostly just, suggestions for interested parties to work on things that might help the community. So with that said, unless there's anything else.
Sorry. So current thoughts for timing is Martin will turn in a new draft. We will start working group last call. Just given US holidays and bits like that, we might take it towards the middle of December. It doesn't have to be a tight 2 week. During that time, if people have ideas for what they would want to see in a recharter of the working group or additional work, we can sort of have that discussion as well at the same time, because that might even tie into the two documents or one of the two documents. But barring that, or barring agreement that we should do that, then post working group last call, we would send them on to our glorious AD, and the working group would stay up through the deliberation of the ISG and then probably close down. Mailing list will stay up because it has a cute name that's quite attractive to people who have problems related to this. Mailing list could absolutely be used for other things, such as talking about the tooling, talking about the tutorial, and things like that. But the working group, in my mind, is likely to shut down before the next IETF meeting, assuming the ISG moves these things through at sort of the normal pace.
Alyssa, do you want to comment on anything, or does that mostly make sense? All right, great. With that, we can adjourn super early. Thanks everyone for coming.
Last blue sheet?
Yeah.
We have one here. Is there another one out there? Great, thanks.
Great.
And if you haven't signed the blue sheet, either come up or go to the back.
Yep. Thank you, everyone.
Yep. Oh, are you serious? Is that why you were trying to get out of here?
Well, I mean, I'm also we don't have anything.
No, I understand.
Would you mind dropping them off?
No, that's fine. I'm sorry? Oh, it's on the front page of our GitHub repo. But I can just let me see. I think we might have actually had it on. You know what? It's on. Are you on the mailing list? Okay, so let me see if I can just put it up now. If I did this correctly. Come on.